New husband changed my life. Chapter 1. The life I always hoped for. My name is Lydia Collins, and for the first time in my life, I wake up smiling. 2 years ago, I married Noah Bennett. Before that, my life was full of pain and silence, but now every day feels like a gentle song. I open my eyes and see Noah beside me, already awake, already smiling. "Good morning, my love," he whispers, and my heart still skips a beat the same way it did on our wedding day. Our little daughter, Clara, sleeps in her crib near the bed. When she moves, Noah gets up first. He walks slowly, lifts her carefully, and whispers, "Hey, little sunshine." I watch them from the bed. My eyes always fill with soft tears, happy tears. I never knew peace could look like this. Noah takes care of me in small ways that mean everything. If I cough once, he brings water. If I sigh, he asks, "What happened?" Sometimes I laugh and say, "Nothing serious," and he answers, "Then I'm still serious about you." He makes me breakfast on weekends and tells me stories while I eat. We talk about our plans, about Clara's future, about simple things that once felt impossible for me. My health has become better too. I used to be weak, anxious, and tired. Now I walk every evening with Noah and Clara. We talk during those walks. No loud music, no phones, just our voices. Sometimes I say, "You've given me a new life." He smiles and replies, "You just needed someone to hold your hand while you healed." At night, when Clara sleeps, we sit together on the couch. Noah places his arm around me. We talk about our day, about work, about little dreams. He always listens carefully. If I speak for long, he never interrupts. When I pause, he says, "Go on, I'm listening." That one line makes me feel safe again. Our home is simple but full of laughter. On Sunday mornings, Noah plays with Clara while I cook. She laughs loudly, trying to grab his beard. He laughs even louder, pretending to lose every game to her. I often think maybe this is heaven, ordinary love that feels extraordinary. Sometimes we do argue, but not in anger. Once we disagreed about moving to another city for his job. I wanted to stay near my friend Hannah. He wanted a better position. I cried that night, afraid of change. The next morning, he came close, held my hand, and said, "I won't move if it hurts you. Home is where you are." That one sentence healed everything. When people meet us, they often say, "You both look perfect together." I smile politely, but deep inside, I know it's not perfection, it's effort. Noah chooses kindness every day, and I choose gratitude. Love is not magic, it's daily work with a gentle heart. Every night before sleeping, I look at Clara's face and then at Noah. I whisper, "Thank you, God, for this peace." Sometimes Noah hears me and replies half asleep, "Don't thank God alone. I worked hard too." I laugh softly and touch his face. Life once felt heavy, but now it feels light, like air after rain. I often remember the woman I used to be, the one who cried quietly and pretended everything was fine. She was strong but tired. Today, that woman finally rests. My heart has learned that not every story ends in pain. Some stories begin right after the storm ends, and this right here is my new beginning. The life I always hoped for, the love I once thought I'd never find, and the peace I now call home. Chapter 2. The Love That Hurt Me. Sometimes peace feels louder when you remember what silence once did to you. Every time I see Noah holding Clara, I think about how different my past was. I was once a woman who believed love could fix everything. I was wrong. Love without respect only breaks you slower. Before Noah, there was Mark Reynolds. I met him when I was 23. He was smart, confident, and funny. Everyone said we looked good together. I believed them. In the beginning, he said all the right things. He sent flowers, wrote messages, and promised forever. When he held my hand, I thought I had found my home, but I was only walking into a storm I couldn't see. After our wedding, everything changed quietly. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, like a light fading each day. Mark stopped asking how I felt. He stopped listening. He started coming home late. When I asked, "Are you okay?" he said, "You worry too much." When I smiled, he didn't smile back. The man who once called me beautiful began to treat me like air. I was there, but invisible. I tried to fix things. I cooked his favorite meals. I left sweet notes on the fridge. I waited near the window when he was late. But the more I tried, the less he cared. One night when he came home, I smelled a strange perfume on his jacket. My hands shook. I said softly, "This doesn't smell like me." He looked at me with cold eyes and said, "You're imagining things." That night, I cried quietly on the bathroom floor, holding a towel against my mouth so he wouldn't hear. Days turned into months. I lost weight, lost sleep, lost myself. He talked to other women freely, even in front of me. Once, when I asked, "Do you still love me?" he replied, "You ask too many questions." I smiled through tears and said, "I just want to hear it once." He said nothing. Silence became his answer to everything. I stopped telling my mother the truth. When she called, I said, "I'm fine." She always believed me because mothers want to believe their daughters are safe. Inside, I was falling apart. I still remember the day I fainted while doing dishes. Mark didn't even look up from his phone. I lay on the floor for a few seconds before getting up alone. That was the moment I understood. I was married, but I was completely alone. One Sunday morning, I prepared his favorite breakfast, hoping we could talk. When he sat down, I said quietly, "I miss how we used to be." He replied, "You're too emotional. I'm tired." His words felt like a slap, even though he never touched me. I stared at the plate and whispered, "Then maybe you're tired of me." He didn't answer. He just left the table. That silence broke me more than any shout could. After that day, I stopped trying. I still cooked, still smiled, but inside I was gone. I became a shadow in my own home. Nights were the hardest. I would hear him talking softly on the phone in the next room. I never asked who it was because I already knew. I cried quietly until my body went numb. One evening, my friend Hannah came to visit. She looked at me and said, "Lydia, you look sick." I smiled weakly and said, I'm just tired." She held my hand and whispered, "This isn't tiredness. This is pain." That night after she left, I sat by the window and asked myself one question: when did I stop being loved? I don't know why I stayed for so long. Maybe because I believed that good wives don't leave. Maybe because I was afraid of what people would say. But one night, after another argument, something inside me broke completely. I said, "Ring Mark, I can't do this anymore." He didn't even look up from his phone. He just said, "Coop, do whatever you want." I walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a small bag. My hands didn't shake this time. I packed a few clothes, my old journal, and my wedding ring. When I placed the ring on the table, I whispered, "You took everything from me except the courage to leave." I left quietly that night with no plan, no destination, only a heart that wanted peace. I stayed with Hannah for a few days. She hugged me and said, "You did the right thing." I cried in her arms and said, Then why do I still feel guilty?" She replied, "Because you loved him more than he deserved." Those words stayed with me. The first night away from him was strange. The bed felt too big, the room too quiet. I thought about his face, about all the times I tried to make him happy. I realized love isn't about holding on, it's about knowing when to let go. I didn't leave because I stopped loving him. I left because I started loving myself a little more. Today, when I look at Noah and Clara, I feel proud of that broken woman who walked out that night. She didn't know where she was going, but she walked anyway. She didn't have strength, but she had hope. That's how she survived. That's how I found the life I always hoped for. Chapter 3. The day I walked away. I still remember that night like it happened yesterday. I was standing near the door with a small bag in my hand. The lights were dim and the house felt colder than ever. Mark was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone like I didn't exist. My heart was breaking, but my face stayed calm. I said softly, "I'm leaving." He didn't even look up. He just said, "You always say things you don't mean." But I meant it this time. For years, I had cried quietly. That night, I was done. I looked around one last time, not at the furniture, not at the wall, but at the memories I was leaving behind. Every corner reminded me of what I gave and never received. I walked out slowly. My feet felt heavy, but my heart whispered, Go. Outside, it was silent. My hands shook as I called a cab. When the car came, I sat inside and closed my eyes. The driver asked, Where to? I said softly, Anywhere that feels safe. He nodded and drove. I cried silently the whole way. Not because I was scared, but because I was free for the first time. I reached Hannah's apartment around midnight. When she opened the door and saw me with tears in a suitcase, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged me tightly. I couldn't speak for a while. I finally whispered, It's over. She said, Good, now let's begin again. For the first few days, I slept a lot. My body was weak, my eyes swollen. Sometimes I woke up and expected to hear Mark's voice. Then I remembered I was finally alone and safe. I cried again, but these tears were different. They didn't hurt, they cleaned my soul. Hannah made me eat properly. She said, You can't rebuild your life on an empty stomach. I laughed for the first time in months. She helped me find a small job at a bookstore near her place. You love books, she said. Maybe they'll love you back. The first day at the bookstore was strange. My hands were still trembling when I arranged the shelves. A young boy asked, Do you work here now? I nodded and smiled. He said, You look nervous. I replied softly, It's been a long time since I smiled at work. He didn't understand, but that's okay. That moment was mine. Every evening, I wrote in my old journal. I wrote letters to myself. Dear Lydia, I wrote, You are not weak for leaving. You were strong for surviving. I reminded myself that I wasn't a failure. I was a woman who had given too much love to the wrong person. Days passed, and I began to breathe again. I started noticing little things, the sound of laughter from strangers, the way coffee tasted when I wasn't crying, the way silence felt peaceful instead of painful. Healing wasn't fast, but it was real. One evening, while closing the bookstore, I met a little girl who came with her mother. She picked a book and asked, Is this story sad? I smiled and said, A little, but it has a happy ending. She said, Then I want this one. When she left, I realized those words were about me, too. My story was sad, but maybe my ending could still be happy. Hannah used to tell me, You'll meet someone better one day. I always said, No, I don't want to love again. But deep down, I wish she was right. I didn't want another man. I wanted someone who could prove that kindness still existed. One night, as we were drinking tea, Hannah said, Do you miss him? I thought for a moment and said, I miss the person I thought he was. She nodded. Then don't let that version of him stop you from becoming the real you. I started reading again. Love stories, poems, anything that reminded me that hope was still alive. I underlined one line from a book that said, Even broken hearts can still beat beautifully. I whispered, Yes, they can. Sometimes when I closed the store late, I saw couples walking together. For a second, I felt a sting in my chest. But then I remembered how it felt to walk beside someone who didn't love you back. I no longer wanted that kind of company. I wanted peace, even if it meant walking alone for a while. One morning, Hannah said, You look different. I asked, Better or worse? She smiled. Free. That word stayed in my mind all day. For the first time, I believed her. I was free. I didn't know that my freedom would soon bring someone new into my life, someone who would make me believe that real love doesn't hurt, someone who would treat my scars as proof that I survived. But that's how life works. You heal quietly, and then love finds you when you least expect it. That night before sleeping, I wrote one last line in my journal. Tomorrow will be better. It has to be. And I was right. Tomorrow really was better because that was the day Noah Bennett walked into my life. Chapter 4: The Stranger Who Smiled. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm inside me. It felt like the world was giving me another chance. At the bookstore, I arranged the new books that had arrived. My hands were still learning to move without fear. but my heart was quiet for the first time. Around noon, the bell above the door rang softly. I looked up, and that's when I saw him for the first time. He looked simple, kind, and calm. He smiled politely and asked, "Do you have something about travel?" His voice was soft, like he didn't want to disturb the peace of the room. I pointed him to a section and said, "Third shelf." He nodded and walked slowly toward it. Something about him made me feel safe without even knowing why. After a few minutes, he came back holding a book. "You read this?" he asked. I smiled a little and said, "Yes, it's one of my favorites." He looked surprised. "Then I'll take your word for it." That was our first small conversation. I didn't know it would change my life. From that day, he began visiting often. Sometimes he bought a book, sometimes he just came to talk. His name was Noah Bennett. He told me he liked books because they made him understand people better. I told him I liked books because they made me forget people for a while. He laughed softly and said, "Maybe that's why we met in a bookstore." I didn't realize how often I waited for him until one day he didn't come. I found myself checking the clock again and again. The next day, when he finally walked in, I smiled before I could stop myself. He noticed. "Did you miss me?" he joked. I said quickly, "Of course not." He laughed. "Good, because I missed our talks." He never asked about my past. Maybe he saw the sadness in my eyes and decided not to open the old wounds. Instead, he asked small, gentle questions about my favorite color, my favorite food, my favorite song. He remembered every answer. One day, when I said I loved apple pie, he brought a small box the next morning and said, "I didn't bake it, but I wanted to make you smile." Sometimes he talked about his late mother who raised him alone. There was a softness in his voice that made me trust him. Once I told him, "You're too kind for this world." He replied, "Kindness doesn't make me weak, it makes me human." That sentence stayed with me. Our friendship grew naturally. He never tried to rush anything. He didn't touch me, didn't flirt, didn't try to impress. He just listened. And that's what I needed most, someone who could hear me without judgment. One afternoon, I told him I was married before. He didn't ask what happened. He only said, "Then you already know how to love deeply." That line broke something inside me. For years, I thought my past made me broken, but to him, it made me real. One day after closing time, we sat near the counter eating pie. I told him about how I once stopped reading because I couldn't focus. He said gently, "Then let's start again, one chapter at a time." I looked at him and said, "You talk like life is a book." He smiled. "Maybe it is. And maybe you just turned a new page." After that day, I started laughing more. Hannah noticed and said, "Someone's making you smile lately." I said quickly, "He's just a customer." She smiled knowingly. "Right, and I'm just a stranger." We both laughed, but my heart skipped a beat. Noah continued visiting, always bringing warmth with him. Sometimes he asked me about random things, like what I would do if I could start over. Once I said, "I'd build a life where I feel safe." He replied, "Then maybe you already started." Still, I was scared. I told him one evening, "I'm not ready to trust anyone again." He said softly, "You don't have to. I'll wait." His calmness scared me more than anger ever did, because I knew he meant it. A few weeks later, it was raining hard. The store was about to close when he walked in soaked, holding 2 cups of coffee. "For you," he said, shaking his wet hair. I laughed for the first time in months, a real loud laugh. He looked at me for a second too long and said quietly, "That laugh is worth the rain." I didn't know what to say, so I looked down. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from feeling something I thought I'd never feel again. Hope. When he left that evening, he said, "Take care, Lydia." I said, "You too." Then he turned back and added, "And don't stop smiling. It suits you." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his words in my head. I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of losing the warmth he brought into my life. Maybe it wasn't love yet, but it was something close, something gentle, something real. I didn't know then that the stranger who smiled at me that day would one day change everything I believed about love, trust, and life itself. Chapter 5. When Love Knocked Again. Weeks passed, and I began to notice the way Noah's presence softened everything around me. He had a habit of showing up without warning, always carrying something small, a muffin, a book, or a smile. One afternoon he said, "You look tired. Have you eaten?" I shook my head. He left for 10 minutes and returned with 2 sandwiches. "Now you have no excuse." I laughed. For years, no one had cared if I ate. He became part of my ordinary days, though he never tried to own them. When I was quiet, he waited. When I spoke, he listened. Once I told him, you make it easy to talk. He answered, "That's because I actually want to hear you." Simple words, but they filled spaces I thought would stay empty forever. Still, part of me stayed guarded. Every time he smiled, a small voice inside whispered, "Don't trust too soon." I wanted to protect what was left of me. He seemed to understand that fear. One evening, as we were closing the store, he said gently, "You don't have to rush. I'm not here to take anything from you." I looked at him and asked, "Then why are you here?" He said, "To give." That night I couldn't sleep. His kindness frightened me because it felt real. I had forgotten what real looked like. A few weeks later, Hannah invited both of us for dinner. It was the first time I saw Noah outside the bookstore. He talked easily with her, made her laugh, and helped wash the dishes. When he left, Hannah looked at me and said, "He's different." I said softly, "Yes, he doesn't make me feel small." She smiled. "Then don't push him away." The next morning, Noah brought me a notebook. "You said you used to write," he reminded me. I opened it and saw my name written inside in neat letters. "Why would you do this?" I asked. He said, "Because you should never forget who you are." I held that notebook to my chest after he left. No one had ever believed in me like that. Our conversations began to change. We spoke less about books and more about life. He told me he had been hurt before, too, that kindness sometimes made people use him. "But I won't stop being kind," he said. "I'd rather be hurt than turn cold." I told him, "You sound like hope in human form." He smiled. "Maybe your hope's mirror." Days blurred into something gentle and familiar. He started walking me home after work. We talked about everything: the past, our mistakes, our dreams. Once, when I tripped slightly, he caught my hand. For a second, neither of us moved. His hand was warm, steady. I looked up and saw the question in his eyes. I said quietly, "I'm not ready." He nodded and said, "Then I'll wait until you are." After that, something in me softened. I stopped comparing him to my past. I started believing that maybe good men still existed. I found myself looking forward to his visits, his laughter, his calm voice. One day, when I thanked him for always showing up, he said, "I don't show up for everyone, only for people who matter." I didn't reply, but my heart did. It whispered his name all night. Then came the day he confessed. It was a rainy afternoon. The store was empty. He stood near the counter, his hands in his pockets, eyes serious but kind. "Lydia," he said slowly, "I care about you. I know you're still healing, but I want to be part of that healing. Not to fix you, just to walk beside you." My throat tightened. I said, "I'm scared." He replied, "So am I, but maybe we can be brave together." I didn't say yes that day. I just smiled through tears and said, "You make it hard not to believe in love again." He took a step closer but didn't touch me. "Then that's enough for now," he said. For the next few weeks, everything changed quietly. He called me Sunshine once by mistake and turned red. I teased, "That's Clara's nickname." He laughed. "Then maybe you both light up my world." We both laughed until I cried again. Not from sadness, but from joy I couldn't hold inside. When I finally agreed to go out with him, I told Hannah first. She screamed with happiness and said, "Finally, you deserve this." That evening, before meeting him, I looked in the mirror and whispered, "You're allowed to be happy again." Dinner was simple. He talked about silly things to make me laugh. At the end, he said, "Can I hold your hand now?" I nodded. It felt like the first safe touch after years of coldness. He said quietly, "See, not all endings are sad." That night when he dropped me home, he didn't ask for more. He just said, "Thank you for trusting me even a little." I replied, "You didn't knock my walls down. You waited until I opened the door." He smiled and said, "That's the only way love should knock." And that was how it began. Not with fireworks, but with patience. He entered my life softly, the way light enters a dark room, slowly but enough to change everything. Chapter 6: A Home Full of Peace. Life with Noah grew slowly, like a song that never rushed. After our first date, things didn't turn into a fairy tale, they turned into something real. He called every morning just to ask, "Did you sleep well?" And every evening he said, "Text me when you reach home." Small things, but they built a wall of safety around my heart. One evening he said, "I don't want to be perfect, Lydia. I just want to be honest." I replied, "Honesty is already perfect to me." We both laughed, but inside I meant every word. After years of lies and silence, his truth felt like medicine. We started spending weekends together. Sometimes we cooked, sometimes we just talked for hours. I told him stories about my childhood, about how I used to write poems but stopped when life got hard. He said, "Then start again. Your words deserve to live." I smiled and said, maybe one day." A few months later, he met my mother. I was nervous, but he was calm as always. He listened to her stories, helped her move a heavy box, and called her ma'am with gentle respect. That night, my mother said, "He looks at you like you matter." I whispered, "That's because he makes me believe I do." Our relationship deepened quietly. There were no dramatic gifts, no big surprises, just steady love. One day he said, "You never have to guess how I feel. I'll tell you every time." And he did. He told me when he was happy, when he was tired, when he missed me. I learned that love doesn't live in grand gestures, it lives in daily honesty. When he finally proposed, it was simple. We were walking back from dinner when he stopped and said, "You once said you wanted a life that feels safe. Would you build it with me?" I froze for a second, then whispered, "Yes." He didn't kneel or hold a ring, he just hugged me tightly. That moment felt bigger than any diamond. Our wedding was small, just Hannah, my mother, and a few close friends. I remember Noah holding my hands and saying, "You will never face silence again." I smiled with tears and replied, "Then you already gave me everything." After the ceremony, I looked at him and thought, maybe pain was the road that led me here. Marriage with Noah felt different from anything I had known. He never raised his voice. When we disagreed, he said, "Let's talk when we calm down." Once we argued about money. I shouted, "You don't understand." He took my hand and said, "Then help me understand." That single line ended the fight. He cared about the smallest things. When I fell sick, he made soup and stayed up until I slept. When I cried remembering my past, he wiped my tears and said, "You're safe now. Don't go back there in your mind." I believed him every time. My health improved too. I joined yoga again, started writing in the notebook he had given me. He read one of my pages one day and said, "You write like you've lived 1,000 lives." I said, "Maybe I have. Pain makes time longer." He kissed my forehead and said, "Then let's make the next 1,000 peaceful." Our first year together passed in warmth. We celebrated small things, my new job promotion, his work success, even the day we bought our first couch. He said, "Every memory counts." When I became pregnant, he was happier than I was. He touched my stomach gently and whispered, "I can't wait to meet our little one." He attended every checkup, learned to cook better, and read parenting books every night. I laughed once and said, "Yeah, you'll be the careful one." He smiled, "And you'll be the strong one." The day Clara was born changed everything. When the nurse handed her to me, Noah's eyes filled with tears. He said softly, "She looks like you." I looked at her tiny face and whispered, "She looks like love." That was the moment I knew every pain from my past had found its purpose. Parenthood tested us, of course. Nights without sleep, endless worries, tiny disagreements. But even when we were tired, we stayed gentle. Once I snapped at him out of frustration and said, "You don't get how hard this is." He took Clara from my arms and said quietly, "Then let me try." I watched him rock her to sleep, humming softly, and tears filled my eyes again, not from exhaustion, but from gratitude. Months later, I caught myself laughing one afternoon for no reason. Noah asked, "What's funny?" I said, "I was just thinking, this is the home I always wanted." He wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "Then promise me one thing. Never forget you built it too." Our house is full of little love notes now. He leaves them everywhere, on the fridge, in my book, beside my pillow. One said, "Thank you for choosing peace." Another said, "You are my calm after every storm." I keep them all in a box because words like those are treasures. Sometimes before sleeping, I whisper, "Do you ever think about the past?" He replies, "Only to remember how far we came." I smile and close my eyes. I'm not haunted anymore. My scars have turned into strength. Now, when I watch Noah feeding Clara or making silly faces just to make her laugh, I realize love doesn't have to be loud. It just has to stay. And his love stayed. It healed every corner of me that I once thought was broken forever. I used to pray for a new life. Now I just thank God for giving me this one. Chapter 7: The Message I Didn't Answer. Life was calm, almost too calm. Clara had started saying small words. Noah and I laughed more than ever. One afternoon, while she slept, I was checking my old emails. That's when I saw it, a new message, a name I had not heard in years. It was from Mark. My hands froze on the keyboard. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The message said, "I hope you're doing well. I miss you. I think about us. Maybe we can talk." My heart began to race. I whispered, "Why now?" Noah was still at work. Clara was sleeping in her crib. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud. I read the message again, as if the words might change. They didn't. They felt heavy, like the past trying to knock again. I walked to the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized, strong, calm, alive. I thought of the girl who once cried herself to sleep because of him. That girl was gone. I touched my chest and said softly, "You don't get to break me twice." When Noah came home that evening, he noticed something in my face. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled weakly and said, "Just tired." He looked at me for a long time and said, "If it's something you want to talk about, I'm here." I nodded but stayed silent. I wasn't hiding it from him out of fear. I just needed to face it myself first. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I opened the message again. For a second, I thought about replying, just to say I had moved on, but then I realized I didn't owe him even that. Silence was my answer. I deleted the email and whispered, "Goodbye." The next morning, I felt lighter. Noah made breakfast and said, "You seem peaceful today." I smiled. I deleted something heavy. He laughed without understanding, but that was okay. He didn't need to. In the next few days, I thought a lot about forgiveness. I realized I had already forgiven him, not for his sake, but for mine. Carrying pain doesn't punish others, it only hurts you longer. Letting go was my freedom. That weekend, we visited my mother. She held Clara and said, "You look happy, Lydia." I said, "I am." She touched my hand and whispered, "Then stay where peace lives." Her words felt like a blessing. That night, while Noah and I were putting Clara to bed, he looked at me and said, "You know what I love most about you?" I asked, "What?" He said, "You choose peace even when chaos knocks." I smiled and replied, "Because now I know peace is worth protecting." I looked at our daughter and thought, "This is my real forever." The man who broke me once no longer had a place in my story. The man beside me had written a new one, a story built on care, patience, and quiet love. Some doors don't need to be slammed, they just need to stay closed. I had closed mine with gratitude, not anger. My heart was finally free, and my life was whole again. Chapter 8, The Heart That Finally Rested. It has been 2 years since that message. Life feels quiet now, but not empty. Clara runs around the house saying new words every day, and Noah still calls me sunshine. We still fight sometimes, still make up before sleeping, still laugh at the smallest things. Nothing is perfect, but everything is peaceful. Sometimes late at night, I think about my past. I don't feel pain anymore. I feel thankful. If I had never walked away from what hurt me, I would never have found what healed me. Noah once said, "We don't choose who breaks us, but we can choose who helps us heal." He was right. Last week, while putting Clara to bed, she looked up and said, "Mommy, are you happy?" I smiled and replied, "Yes, baby, I'm happy because I have you and Daddy." She kissed my cheek and said, "Then I'm happy too." That small moment said everything my heart needed. Noah often reminds me, we've come far, haven't we? And I always say, yes, from pain to peace, from tears to love. He laughs softly and says, "You make it sound like a story." I smile. It is a story, and we wrote it together. I've learned that love is not about who stays longest, it's about who stays kindly. Noah didn't rescue me. He simply stood beside me until I rescued myself. That's real love, gentle, patient, and steady. Now, when I look at him holding Clara, I whisper a quiet prayer of thanks. I don't ask for more. I just ask that this peace stays. My journey began with heartbreak, but it ends with hope because my heart has finally rested. The end